Okay, uh, so one of the texts that you can use for the final essay is Girl by Jamaica Kincaid. So let's just do a little recap of some background. So we have the narrator, who's a mother figure, and she's talking to the girl. And in the text, what we see here are a series of chores and suggestions and demands, all of these things that the narrator thinks that the girl must do, must know in order to be a woman in society. And so that's our background. And so for our essay, if you're using this story, you want to be able to talk about how the figurative language in here tells us something about the girl's experience coming of age, growing, changing. Okay. So if you think back to your discussion journal and your discussion journal questions on this, you had questions about specific metaphors in the story related to relationships. You had questions about what's the primary fear that the narrator has. And so if you look at this story in any detail, you'll see that the narrator has a series of worries about what's going to happen to the girl. They are a lot to do with how the girl is presenting herself, or how the narrator feels that the girl is presenting herself to other people, to men particularly. And one other central theme or even anxiety of this piece has to do with the girl finding a suitable partner, someone suitable to marry, and how she's going to come off to prospective suitors and people that she could marry. Okay. So I mentioned those things because the figurative language in this story directly relates to that. So rather than giving away all the figurative language in the story, I'm going to point out several parts of this story that you might look at in detail. So I will actually start on this page here. This section is one of the places to me that seems not incredibly obvious, but it is clearly an example where there's language in here that's not just talking about what it's talking about. So this is the section that I'm referring to. This is how to catch a fish. This is how to throw back a fish you don't like, and that way something bad won't fall on you. So my question to you is, how does that have to do with relationships? And how does that have to do with relationship advice? Another spot I see on this page is here, where it says, "Don't pick people's flowers. You might catch something." So that seems like a weird sort of a phrase. What are you going to catch from a flower? Again, I would push you to look at this as relationship advice. What does it mean that the author describes these as other people's flowers? And if you're picking other people's flowers, again, we're thinking about this in terms of a relationship, then what are some of the things you might catch? So you want to look at the language in this story, and you want to look at the other parts of this story, the tone of the narrator, the mother figure, There are several possible interpretations for this, but again, what does this have to do with relationship advice? What could the flowers represent? Again, why does it matter that they're other people's flowers? Here's another one where you had a specific question asking you about this, the end here, where it's talking about the baker and the bread. It says, always squeeze bread to make sure it's fresh. But what if the baker won't let me feel the bread? You mean to say that after all this, you're really going to be the kind of woman the baker won't let near the bread? Again, on the surface, we've got advice about daily life. When you're going to the baker's, make sure you know what you're buying before you buy it. And make sure you're the type of person the baker can trust. Okay, straightforward enough, fair enough. But what does this have to do with relationships? In this first part, always squeeze bread to make sure it's fresh. How does that relate back to the metaphor about the fish? Here's how to throw back a fish you don't like. Here's how to squeeze bread to make sure it's fresh. So again, if we're not just talking about a baker and bread here, how could this relate to relationships and finding a possible future mate or future husband? So how does this relate? There are a lot of other examples here. This is how to spit up in the air if you feel like it and move quick so that it doesn't fall on you. Obviously talking about some sort of consequences here. There's a lot of literal language. This is how to do this. This is how to do that. But on the first page here, there are a couple examples that I think are pretty related to relationships as well. Don't eat fruits on the street. Flies will follow you. So that's right after the narrator says something about you mustn't speak to wharf rat boys, not even to give directions. So wharf rat boys, as in people who are just kind of hanging around, people who are, up to no good and ready to influence this girl in a negative way. Okay. So in this next part, don't eat fruits on the street, flies will follow you. If the narrator is not just talking about fruit and not just talking about flies, how could this relate to how the girl represents herself in society? And how could that relate to the narrator's anxiety about the types of men and the types of people that the girl will be mixing with? Similarly, this is how you grow okra far from the house, because okra tree harbors red ants. Alright. So, the okra tree and the house and the ants, there are a couple moving parts in this image, but you should notice that there are the ants in this example, and there are the fruit flies in the other example. So who does the narrator, this mother figure, see as a possible threat to the girl? Again, in terms of relationships, and in terms of intersex relationships and sexual development. Alright, so I'll leave you to interrogate the rest here.